Okay, everyone having a okay Halloween so far?
Decent.
Decent.
Wait, today's Halloween?
Well, tomorrow. LPH is doing their big thing out there.
Oh, okay.
And,
I tried to walk around.
What's up?
What is this? National Communication.
communication
Oh, the honors thing?
society. Every comm studies person is a member of LPH,
Every.
right? Every.
Hopping on that.
There we go. All right. All right. We got two chapters to work on today, which are both part of a similar approach. So this is hopefully going to be something that you find really practical and applicable for you because it deals with relationships. And so these are two good chapters about how relationships work. Now, there's an overview of what the whole approach is called, and it's known as the cybernetic. So the cybernetic model or tradition is the one that is over the Watzlawick chapter and the Weick chapter. So the two chapters you looked at, they both fall into this perspective. So what I'm going to do first off today is to go over the whole perspective as a whole, and then we'll fit in the different parts. But once you get the big principles in view, it'll go easier for you. All right, so we're going to talk about this cybernetic principle. Now, you will remember in some communication course or other you took, you did the sender message receiver model. If you remember this, we're just going to go over it again. The idea that you have a sender who wants to communicate a message. So the sender has a message that needs to go to a receiver. So this is sometimes called a basic communication model. But this is actually a theory. You know, this is a way of explaining, describing what happens in communication. So the Shannon-Weaver sender-receiver model is a base approach to thinking about what goes on in communication. Now, Shannon and Weaver were people who worked for the phone company. And they created this to deal with how messages travel over phone lines and how messages could be communicated over radio waves and things like that. So you remember the parts of it, right? There's the sender, there's the message, the receiver. What else comes into this model?
Channel.
Okay, so you have a channel. Right, so the channel carries the message. So an example of a channel is vocalizing, you know, speaking words. Example of a channel is a telephone wire, is a radio wave. All of these things are examples of channels, right? And then someone else said noise. All right, so if you have your cell phone on and you're really far out from a tower or something, there's going to be all this static and it's going to fade in and out. The signal is weak. You're going to hear other noise. You ever hear other people's conversations on your phone? Yeah. Yeah, it's really weird. So you've got noise. You've got message that isn't meant to be the message. You're receiving something that's not meant to be the information. So I want to add that word to this model right now. Information. Because part of Weick's point in his chapter about organizations is that you're constantly getting all kinds of messages, all kinds of communication when you're in an organizational setting. And your job is not necessarily to get more information to solve what's going on as it is to filter out the stuff that's not relevant to what the message is. So you get two different things. So you have source, the message, the channel, the receiver. You have noise. Anyone remember other parts of this?
Transmitter.
What's that?
Transmitter.
Okay. This would be some kind of a transmitter, some kind of receiver, right? You have an encoding and a decoding.
Context for message?
All right, well, we'll just take them one at a time. Let's make sure we understand these. This is where the word modem comes from. I don't know if you realize that in your computers. You know, you talk about having a modem. Sometimes anybody use modems? Nobody uses modems. Everybody uses a cable. But a modem meant to modulate and demodulate a message. So you modulate it, you encode it onto a signal, electrical signal, and then you uncode it when it gets to your computer. So you had a modem that would translate signals back and forth. So that's the point there. And we do that by putting our thoughts into words. We encode our thoughts into words. We transmit them verbally. The other person hears, receives it, decodes it, and then has thoughts. And semiotics tells us a little bit about how that works, because you have signs that are all part of it. Okay, so you have your source, your channel, your message receiver. Actually, context is not part of Shannon-Weaver's model.
No, it's the, what is it, the Jakobson?
Okay, yeah, well, we'll build on this. We're just going to start with this basic one. And then there's one more part of this that sometimes they add, and that's the feedback. So feedback is where the receiver checks to see that the right information has been received. So this is, I mean, if you say to someone, let's go to dinner, and the receiver says, you mean tonight, that's feedback from the question to clarify the information that's come across. And so this is all just language that gives us a way to describe what's going on in communication. So what you're doing in your reflections, you take an incident and you apply some language to it, like semiotic language, or you apply rhetorical language to it. Well, now we're learning a new language about semiotics. It has sources, messages, signals, noise, feedback. And we talk a lot here also about input and output. So the idea that a message goes out and then something happens from it. So you say something to someone, and then there's some kind of a action that results from that. And so that output then becomes a new input. So you say to someone, let's go out for dinner. They reply, do you mean tonight? Well, that becomes input to you. And then you have another output. I mean, no. I don't mean tonight, I mean some other time. So it's input, output becomes input, which becomes output. And there's an easier way to do this than to string it all out. The easier way to do it is to say that these things function in a loop. So the input becomes output, which becomes input, which becomes output. So when you have a conversation with somebody, you say something, they say something, you respond back, they say something. You're engaged in an input-output loop, is one way to think of this. And part of what we say in cybernetics is that most systems or most interrelated parts try to maintain a certain stability. They try to keep things, a system generally tries to keep things stable. So like if somebody says, I'm really upset, you try to calm them down. You don't generally escalate it. You want to keep it stable, so the input. So you try to stabilize the situation. You want everything back to normal. You don't want it to be too upset. And in our language, we have a particular word for that. which is called homeostasis. So to keep it the same, to have it stand in the same place. You want things to... No one wants to work in a crazy workplace. Nobody wants to live in a family that's always upset. Everything, you try to stabilize it. And so we talk about systems or groups of interrelated parts that have inputs and outputs. What they're doing is seeking to establish some kind of a stability, some kind of a base level of where things are at. So cybernetic theories, or Watzlawick's interaction theory, or Weick's organizational theory, asks the question, how is communication going on in this thing, between who and what ways, in order to establish some kind of a stability here? Now let's ask this question. Is stability in a family or an organization or a relationship a good thing? Okay, it's good because...
Keeps everything under control.
Okay, there's less chaos and we have less anxiety and less stress. So that's good. You know, because when we get stressed, we get sick and all kinds of things happen to us when we're under stress. But what's the problem with stability in a relationship or a family or an organization? Jason?
Boring.
Okay, it may be boring. It may be non-functional. For instance, if we have a company that is not adjusting to changes in its environment, you know, all of a sudden there's competition and they don't change anything, they keep doing things the same, that becomes a non-functional stability. Or you could have a family that's really not working very well. It's damaging to the people who are in the family, but it's stable. Everyone knows what to predict, how people are going to act. So there's not a lot of tension, but it's also not very good. So these are the concepts that cybernetics works with, is the question of stability, and then the way in which the system communicates in order to deal with the stability that it has. Now, so you have a context. Now this gets into a little bit where Joan was going. You have a context. So let's say you run a company that, I don't know, makes shoes. Let's say you run a shoe company. And so you've been running that shoe company, your grandfather ran the shoe company, you ran the shoe company, and everything's good. All of a sudden, you know, there's a new store that opens up down the street called Famous Footwear or something. And they've got shoes for a fourth of the price that you're selling them for. Okay. So here you are a system, a small system existing. You have your, you know, there's your grandfather and your father and your brother and you all interact in a certain way. You know how to make this business work. You do things, you talk to him, you talk to her, you know how to get things done. You have established a stable system. Now, there's pressure brought onto your system from outside. Okay, your system is asked to adapt to a new context or a new environment. So what's likely to happen here? In this little system, in this little group, the grandfather, the father, the brother, the sister, the mother, everybody's in this group. They've been making shoes for generations. They're doing it. Now all of a sudden there's competition from the outside. Can you predict what's going to be going on here? So what do you predict, Jason? What do you predict?
It's going to cause stress on all of their relationships because the outside force is going to cause them to start losing business, and then, I mean, that might generate blaming each other for it, and then their own personal relationships are going to be affected by the business.
Okay, so what's happening is they have pressure put on them to change the patterns of relationships that they have. So they've established a set of patterns. This is, we do it this way, and then this happens, and this happens. I say this, you say that. We all know how this works. Low energy, low maintenance, goes along just fine. Now we've got some stress. All of a sudden, there's this, the bottom line is not coming out as well. We're losing market share. We're losing business. So now we start saying different things to each other, which causes stress because it's different from what we had established before, which then we begin to respond to that with new messages and patterns, and it disrupts the whole system. The whole system gets pushed into an anxious state, the whole relationships, and people then, when they get anxious, they start to do damaging things, destructive things in the systems. And so part of what we study in cybernetics, or in Watzlawick's interaction analysis, or in Weick's organizational analysis, is this whole question of what patterns of communication exist, what do they produce, and then how do those patterns deal with external pressures. So that's the language you would use in doing this kind of analysis. You would look at inputs, output systems, patterns of communication, behaviors of members of the system. And so this is part of what we'll think about here. So, you know, we have a way of doing communication studies that is mostly psychological, that asks, well, why does somebody say what they say? Or why do they behave the way they behave? And that's the psychological perspective. It says that the reason someone does something is found inside the individual. This approach says that people do what they do because they are part of a system, because they're part of an interconnected, complicated group of relationships. So it's a different way of doing analysis of what's going on. And we'll look at families as a way to think about this. But here's a simple way for you to realize this. Do you feel like a different person sometimes when you're with a different group of people? Right? Are you this? So what's that about? Are you the same person, or what?
I think just other people make you feel different.
Okay, so you are affected by the pattern of relationships, or the complicated things that go on when you have 2, 3, 4 friends around, changes you a bit.
It also depends on, like, you're not going to completely act the same way you do around your friends than you do with your grandparents. It's just a matter of, like, set rules, though, too, and things that have been passed down to your culture or something.
Right, and part of the reason you don't is because you don't want to upset the patterns that exist and the system that exists. So you're part of different systems, and you behave differently because of the patterns and the rules that govern those different relationships. Mike, what are you going to say?
I was just going to say, you act differently to make whoever you're talking to comfortable, so it'll be like more effective communication, I guess.
Well, that's part of the question that we ask here, is that and you're right, we naturally seek to reduce the anxiety or to stabilize things. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad. Depends what the context is and what we need to be doing. So we'll look at that. Here's another simple example of this. Is your house, let's draw, is your house, and it's getting colder, or your dorm room, right? I don't know if you have thermostats in your dorm room or not. Do you? No? Anyway, let's pretend you're at a place that has a thermostat, right? So the temperature is, let's say the temperature is 56 degrees in this room. You don't want it to be 56 degrees. It's really cold. You want it to be around 70 degrees, 60s or 70s. So temperature, so you have a thermostat that does what? What does a thermostat do in a room?
Adjusts the temperature.
How does it adjust the temperature?
temperature is in the room will, assume the temperature that you put on the thermostat?
Okay, so the thermostat receives a message from the environment. And the message that it receives from the environment is it's 56 degrees in here. So the thermostat then sends an output. It sends a message to what? The thermostat sends a message to your furnace, your heater, whatever kind of furnace you have. So the furnace is out there or down in the basement or wherever it is, and it's got gas or it's got oil. And the furnace gets a message. And the message to the furnace is, go on. All right? So the furnace then does an output. The output of the furnace is warm air, or heating up the baseboard heaters, or hot water or something. Now, the temperature starts going up. All the while, your thermostat is still getting input. And it's still sending messages, go on, go on, go on. Temperature gets to be about 70. The thermostat now has a new message and sends out a different output, stop. Furnace stops. So there's a system of things getting input, messages, and behaving in certain ways in order to stabilize the temperature in the room. All right, so then temperature stays at 70. Temperature goes to 69, and what happens? Gets input, sends a message, turns it on, heats it up. Now, what's the problem with this? Let's think about this. If the rules of this are, if it's 70 degrees, turn the furnace off. If it's below 70 degrees, turn the furnace on. Anybody see a potential problem with this? What are you going to say, Bill? No? All right. Let's suppose the temperature is 69.9 degrees. What happens?
It's going to turn on.
It's going to turn it on. Okay? So it goes on, and it takes maybe 15 seconds to get it to 70. So then it goes off. How long does it take to go to 69.9 again? Probably 15 seconds. So what's happening to your system?
It's going on and
It's
off.
going on, off, on, off, on, off. Do you want that? Is that good, for the whole thing? That's called an oscillation, right? It just goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it just wears itself out. All right, so how are you going to fix that?
Probably once it goes to a certain, in my house, if we set it for 70, once it gets like 5 or 6 degrees below, then it'll turn back on. But it's set at certain times though. It's times it doesn't.
Okay, you could do it by times, or you can set a range. You can give it some range to work within. You could say, okay, when you turn on, go up to 72 degrees, and don't go back on again until it's 67 degrees, you could say. So what that does is it reduces the system is not going bang, 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 on and off all the time. Now the way this works in relationships is you need some tolerance in your relationships, or else you're constantly in an oscillation. Let's say there are two people who have a relationship, and one of them, if they don't feel close to the other person, they begin to send messages. I'm not feeling close to you, right? And so the other person needs to send messages, well, I really care about you, we have a relationship, everything's okay. Now, if you don't have much of a tolerance in the one person, what's going to be happening in that relationship?
It's going to be an on and off relationship.
It's going to be constantly, I'm not feeling close. Well, okay, and then it goes down in 10 minutes or an hour, and then it's this constant, need for reaffirmation in a relationship, which is because there's not much tolerance for a range in it. So systems have to deal with the question of what range of behaviors are acceptable before I start sending out correction messages in this system. So you can have people who are in these vibrating relationships because there's always this sense of insecurity, for instance. So systems theory helps us to see that we can get into oscillations or we can get into feedback loops in our the way we interact with you. One of the common feedback loops is person A feels the need to always be checking, always be talking about things. So they're always sending messages to person B about, I need affirmation, I need to check, I need to be sure, I need this, which leads to person B withdrawing because they're feeling a little over demand on them. So the more they withdraw, what happens to the other person?
A freaks out.
A keeps sending more messages. A ramps up the intensity, so B withdraws more, and A ramps up the intensity, and B withdraws more. And this thing just spirals out of control. This is a feedback loop. See, in cybernetics, we call this a feedback loop. And there's no governor in it. There's no place that says, at this level, slow it down. See, so you would need to build into this loop something that said, you know, some tolerances. So A would have to say, okay, I need to establish a range of feeling comfortable. B would have to respond to that. And then there would have to be a governor in here that says, if the intensity is over, 18, or I don't know, whatever number you want to give it. If the intensity is over 18, change the program. Stop, because you're going to burn this system out. So this is feedback systems. This is a way of thinking. I mean, it doesn't sound very human, but it's a way of thinking about how multiple things interact with each other. And so you can begin to do your own relationships, your own family, your own organizations by asking these questions. Well, who says what to who? What are the results? How does that feed into someone else? And what are the dampers or what are the governors that keep this system from oscillating or spiraling out of control through feedback that goes on? At some point, you have to have something that shuts it down or slows it down. All right, any quick thoughts before I go more with this? So you get a feel for how this is very useful way of doing analysis of communication. But you've got new language, and that's what I'm pushing you at in your... I'll wait till I get done. So when you do a cybernetic analysis, you're not interested in the signs necessarily that are being used, right? Like semiotics is. And you're not asking questions about logic and you're not asking questions about logic or emotions, ethos or pathos. You're asking questions about when this input comes in, what is the output? And then what does that become input to? And what does that set off? And how are the loops? Where are the loops that exist? Where things keep feeding on themselves. All right, so let's take example from your book, the one about the family in your book. So Griffin gives you this family to look at that has a father and mother and two children, Stan and Lori. I don't know if you remember the story of the book, but this is a high-achieving family, right? Mike is, Sonia is a pianist, right? She's excels as a piano player and teacher. Mike is, what is his deal?
Is it Mike the screw-up?
No, Mike is the Stan, I think. Maybe I got him wrong.
Mike is the dad. Yeah, Stan is the dad.
Stan is the dad, all right. Stan's dad, Mike's the kid. All right. So what is Stan's deal? He's a lawyer, is it, or what?
He's going to become a partner in a Big Four accounting firm.
Okay, accounting firm. So he's in an accounting firm. So he's successful. So Stan and Sonia are successful. Lori is like tennis player and class something or other. Okay. And so Mike is dropping out, tuning out. He's going down a self-destructive road. Okay. Now, there's a number of ways you can look at this. You can look at this psychologically, right? You can look at it and like, well, what's going on in Mike's mind, and what's his history, and you know, how was he raised, and what went on when he was raised, and all these things. You could try to do this